Alex Heath, The Verge, sources. Twitter could make Twitter Blue a $20 a month subscription that verifies users. Staff have until November 7th to build the feature or face being fired. Related, Casey Newton, platformer, sources. Twitter is strongly considering taking away its verified users' badges if they don't subscribe to Twitter Blue. I had this same suspicion, thought this weekend. So I was listening to the dedicated Vergecast conversation between Nilay, Liz, Alex, David. Verification of sort of known good actors, which is a statement with a lot of qualifiers, which we can get into, is a great way to create a premium tier for Twitter, the service. I'm not going to make a case for a particular price point because I think that's far too enmeshed in product strategy and those sorts of things. Got to go into a lot of detail in order to make an argument for $20 a month versus $5 a month versus whatever. But what I will say is this: Twitter, the service, has proven over years to be remarkably sticky with many people, but a cohort in particular that I find relevant, at least for this discussion, is people who, broadly speaking, produce the news, journalists, writers. And the notion that this tool has proven to be, if not indispensable, then at least a compulsion for many of the people who work in media, the notion that there's not a dollar value that those people would pay in order to continue to use the service is naive, in my opinion. I think it's obvious that people would pay some amount of money in the form of recurring revenue to Twitter in order to continue to use Twitter and to continue to use a version of the experience which is, or at least aims to be, materially higher quality than sort of raw, unadulterated, massive users. And there's a lot of work to be done to deliver on a promise like that. Today, the mechanisms for protecting oneself as a sort of well-meaning user on Twitter from the worst of user behavior on Twitter, those mechanisms are few and far between, and there are plenty of people who would tell you that they're not particularly effective. That's the work of building a better product. That's arguably why Elon would put such a, frankly, draconian criteria on shipping this feature. Ship it in 10 days or your job's on the line. Again, there's a conversation to be had about whether or not Elon is a reasonable person, whether or not that is the sort of behavior that the market should reward. I frankly want to set all that aside because those are moral and ethical conversations which take a lot more time. But simply put, you know, we can go back to the story from Friday about Twitter's performance relative to the S&P 500. We can also go further back, and without any particular source to cite right now, and look at Twitter's product evolution, the maturity of the offering over, say, the last year or the last 5 years or the last 10 years. The fact that there are no greater mechanisms for blocking out what is, I suppose, most charitably described as static from users' accounts that exist in Twitter, so that a well-meaning, rational actor who's a user of Twitter can have an experience that is functional. You know, and Elon certainly mentioned it multiple times. Enough other people with, moderate to large Twitter followings, Scott Galloway comes to mind, have made the same case. If you're sufficiently high profile as a Twitter user, effectively anything you publish is immediately replied to by, again, sort of static. And if what you're trying to do as a Twitter user is share your ideas in a forum such that you can get feedback from other well-meaning users, the fact that all that static exists effectively breaks the product experience. Like, it breaks the value proposition. You can't use the tool nearly as well as you could without all that static. And this, I think, is part and parcel with the case that's been made by many people over years with regard to getting the blue check mark, with regards to Twitter verification. And that case is, make it more available for the people who are motivated to not have the cute check mark next to their name, although in some circumstances, if you're a public figure or whatever, there's value in saying, I am the real, insert human being's name here, and I have to do that because the service has effectively no way to stop n number of accounts to be spun up that are made to look like me, made to impersonate me. Like, that problem needs to get solved. But verification is admittedly very much a hammer, but nonetheless an effective tool for solving that particular issue, right? There are 15 accounts that all look like the same public figure, but there's one that's verified. There's value there. Just as there is value for someone like me, a totally average individual who has believed in the promise of Twitter going back to 2006, who would be interested in sort of submitting to whatever reasonable verification process is required in order to have that verification to say, like, I'm really me, therefore you can trust that I am who you are interacting with to the extent that you care about who I am. But the point is, if you increased by an order of magnitude, 2 orders of magnitude, 3 orders of magnitude, the number of users who successfully go through that verification process, then the ability to remove and factor out a lot of the static has more value. And to me, that gets to sort of back to where I started, which is the $20 a month floated cost. there are plenty of people who will tell you that that is an exorbitant cost. I would agree that it's higher than it needs to be, but not by that much. Again, look at the cohort of people who are, with all the love and respect in the world, most addicted to Twitter. They work in media. Do you really mean to tell me that if you are employed by the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, the Boston Globe, the Verge, that you wouldn't pay that price, and more accurately, expense that cost to your employer because it's an indispensable tool for you to do your job? I don't think that's a stretch. I don't think it's a stretch to imagine that there are 1 million users who are either currently Twitter users today or part of the total addressable market who would pay $250 a year in order to have a higher quality, distilled, better signal to noise experience using Twitter. And even if there aren't 1 million users who would pay $250 a year, or again, more to the point, have their employer foot the bill to the tune of $250 a year, how many people would pay $100 a year? Like, how many people are throwing $5 a month, which is $75 a year? Again, I'm bad at arithmetic. Not as well practiced as arithmetic as I should. $70 a year. How many people are throwing $70 a year at Substacks they like, at one human being's voice in one avenue? I mean, that's all of Substack's business is $5 a month here, $10 a month there for a single individual, or in some cases, a collection of individuals under a banner. The notion that Twitter, with all of the people who are committed to using Twitter today and potentially in the future, which, let's not lose sight of the North Star, is absolutely a part of the goal here, grow the total addressable market of people that use Twitter. You don't believe that there are 1 million users who would pay $120 a year? I think there are probably 10 million or 50 million who would pay $120 a year. That's real money. Time for a set. Washington Post, source: Elon Musk plans to lay off 25% of Twitter's workforce in the coming days, focusing on sales, product, engineering, legal, and trust and safety. Related, Lauren Hirsch, New York Times: Twitter faces around $1 billion per year in interest expenses after Elon's deal added $13 billion in debt, up from around $50 million in 2021, when operations generated around $633 million in cash flow. Related, Alex Heath, The Verge: sources: Elon Musk directed Twitter executives to quietly change the homepage for logged out users to the Explore page instead of a sign-up form on October 28th. Related, Financial Times: sources detail the twists and turns in Elon Musk's $44 billion takeover of Twitter, starting in March, falling apart, and then closing late on October 27th. sort of loose strands here. Laying off 25% of the workforce. Those categories listed, there aren't a lot of other groups left, which, this is a total shot in the dark on my part, would indicate that those categories, sales, product, engineering, legal, and trust and safety, probably represent the lion's share of headcount, right? It's probably where most of Twitter's headcount lives, is in those buckets. The fact that Twitter's now got $1 billion a year in debt service, the fact that Elon changed the homepage from a sign-up form to something with content in it, and the overall twists and turns of the deal. The overall twists and turns of the deal, that book's going to get written. Read it once it's written. I'm reading it now. Why? Changing the homepage to the Explore page? Hell yeah. This is fundamentally a service about delivering access to information. Whether that information is a statement of sort of objective reality, such as Queen Elizabeth II has died, or information in the form of a conversation. So-and-so said this, so-and-so said that, this person said the other thing. Why would you not have that be at the surface when someone lands on the homepage? Again, many sort of details to file under this theme of what exactly has the Twitter product team been doing for years now. If the front door experience is, hey, you should create an account. Why? Like, imagine if you went to the New York Times website or the Miami Herald's website, and all you got was a sign-up form. Like, it would be absurd. It's obviously absurd. And there are a huge number of differences between Twitter and a traditional media organization. There is, however, one very important commonality. They're both places where people go to get information. Every traditional media organization in the world understands that putting the information out there is job zero. That's how you get people to want to stick around. It's how you get people to want to come back tomorrow, is you're presenting them with value. So the notion that the Twitter homepage presents zero value and instead asks for action on the part of a user, this is obviously a good idea. Twitter's debt service. Look, it's very difficult to understand what Elon plans to do on any given front, at least until such time as the business is sufficiently mature, right? I think we could all make fairly safe bets on what SpaceX is going to do, what Tesla is going to do. They've had enough time to get into market, prove their value, make it plain why the business exists. Twitter's in a massive period of upheaval, so it's difficult to understand why Elon bought it. But the one thing that I think is absolutely clear is he plans on scaling the size of the business. Maybe not at first. Maybe what it looks like at first is a niche, premium, exclusive product experience. Those who are students of Elon will recall, this is how Tesla started, right? Today, Yes, on the margins, it's difficult to get a hold of the cars. Like pre-orders take a long time, but generally speaking, a sub $50,000 purely electric vehicle can be had in many countries around the world because of Tesla growing into what it is today. The first product Tesla sold was basically a reskinned Lotus with batteries in it, and they sold it for $150,000. That's the premium product. So let's go back and look at the notion of how absurd it is to want to pay $20 a month to use Twitter. If the experience is sufficiently premium relative to what the experience is of using Twitter for $0 per month, maybe that's worth it to somebody. So the debt service, well, burdening the business with orders of magnitude more debt looks concerning unless you factor in the notion that like it's absolutely his intention to scale the business. And that what that would mean is that at some point in the not too distant future, assuming he's able to execute and get the business where he wants it to go, that won't be a burdensome amount of debt. And lastly, laying off 25% of the workforce. You know, again, no one should have to lose their job, particularly not people who are performing well in their roles. But you now have a person who owns the business who has a dramatically different idea, not just of what does it look like to perform well in your role, person working in sales or product or engineering or legal and trust and safety, but do we need your role to exist at all? That's quite frankly like where he's starting, right? You listen to him talk, he's a big fan of going from first principles. And I think if you take over a business, one of the things you may find yourself wanting to do is clear away as much as you can and still have the business keep operating as it currently exists, and then put back the pre-existing pieces and new pieces such that you can get it to where you want it to go. So it is the bummer of all bummers that 25% of the employees of Twitter could be out of a job by the end of this week. No doubt about that. But I'm not sure why anyone would expect a whole lot different. Anyway. Alyssa Luckpat, Wall Street Journal. The top 20 tech billionaires globally have lost $480 billion plus on paper in the past year. Mark Zuckerberg's wealth drops by $87 billion plus, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos by $58 billion plus. We're supposed to care about this because someone's on paper net worth has a direct impact on their ability to operate in the public markets. If Elon's net worth was $50 billion lower back in March when he wanted to acquire Twitter, maybe he wouldn't have been able to get the deal done. So, yeah, like somebody should pay attention to this, but I can't get the bat off my shoulder to say a whole lot else. Selena Cheng, Wall Street Journal. Inside Foxconn's Zhengzhou iPhone plant, as the company grapples with a week-long COVID-19 outbreak during a critical period, leading to harsh lockdown measures. This is horrible. It's human travesty. There's no other way to slice it. I think, hopefully, with some amount of hindsight, we can learn about how to deal with global scale contagions in more humane ways. And in the nearer term, this, I'd like to believe, will spur Foxconn, more importantly, customers of Foxconn, like Apple, like Microsoft, like Foxconn probably makes refrigerators for someone, to look to open manufacturing facilities in nation states which are more interested in the individual rights and freedoms of their citizens than China appears to be. Time for another set. Wall Street Journal. Sources: US-based self-driving trucking company TuSimple faces US federal probes into whether it improperly financed and transferred tech to a Chinese startup. Related, Wall Street Journal. TuSimple's board fires CEO Jiadi Ho after reports the U.S. is probing whether it improperly financed and transferred tech to a Chinese startup. Stock drops 44% plus. If this is the first instance of this type of industrial espionage, I highly doubt it's going to be the last. Spinning up a business from a paperwork perspective in the United States, not particularly difficult. And spinning up a business in the real functional sense, never been easier. If you're building the tech for vehicles to drive themselves, some of that is real hardcore mechanical engineering and electrical engineering. You need lab space and heavy shit. But some of that is laptops and an internet connection. And so I've never heard of TuSimple. I have no idea whether or not there's anything to the federal government probing them. But the reason for the probe, the headline would indicate, is that the business is taking technology that it developed in the United States under U.S. law, which is what happens when you start a business, you're subject to U.S. law, and handing it to an entity in another country. That's not allowed. When I was a kid, if you lived in Baghdad, you couldn't buy a PlayStation 2 because the United States deemed the processing power in that gaming console to be great enough that you could be advantaging the weapon system development for the Iraqi military. So something tells me this is not that different. Time for another set. Amanda Hoover, Wired. Some Twitter users concerned about Elon Musk's ownership are moving to alternative platforms, including Mastodon, which has seen signups surge, and Discord. It's bound to happen. He's a polarizing figure, and so it should come as no surprise that there are people who would rather take their business elsewhere. Okay. Discord is it's a different beast. It's a much more insular experience than, say, Mastodon. Although even Mastodon, from what I remember of its architecture back when it first came on the scene years ago, is not, there's not a global namespace, which simply put means you're able to interact with the other Mastodon users on a particular server, and then you have to hop into a different server in order to interact with a different group of users. And that's a suboptimal model, in my opinion. What the Blue Sky team is working on at its core solves for this issue. It will allow for a global namespace such that any user can communicate with any other user. Again, assuming that one or both of those users don't have filters or other mechanisms in place that would prevent communication. So people leaving Twitter.com because it's run by someone they have strong feelings about, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Moreover, in a not too distant future, you will be able to interact with a user of Twitter.com or all users of Twitter.com without ever giving Elon a dime of your money or a bit of your data, except in the scenario where your content is your data. Now we get into the strange morass of data privacy regulation, which is if you write a funny joke and you put it on a website, which is what you're doing when you post to Twitter or Mastodon or any other sufficiently public forum, how do you exercise your ownership claim over that data? Somebody else can read it, somebody else can copy it. You can take that website down, you can delete that tweet, but if old analogy from an entrepreneur who worked in the venture firm that I worked in out of high school, I was an IT support jockey, talking about the MP3, music has to be translated to analog in order for you to hear it. So this sort of digital chain of ownership that people hope for when they talk about data privacy and the right to pick up all your data and take it somewhere else. Yeah, technically speaking, you can do that, but I can screenshot what you wrote, and maybe at some point in the future, it winds up getting litigated in a court of law or in the court of public opinion, whether my screenshot is authentic. Okay. But point is, leaving Twitter because you don't like Elon is absolutely your prerogative. I just hope that that same group of people can sort of understand that their ethic ought not to extend to a point where you don't want to use anything that uses the same protocol that Twitter is quite likely to be using in the future, right? Because that would be akin to saying, "Oh, I don't use email because I think Google is evil and Google offers an email product. So I won't communicate with you over email, or I only communicate with people over email if they use the Proton Mail email service." Like, that's a extreme edge case, and that would be a loss for the global public conversation. Time for another step. Amitaj Singh, CoinDesk. The Reserve Bank of India plans to begin testing its CBDC on November 1st, with 9 banks participating, and a retail version by the end of November. I'm assuming, because I haven't come across this acronym before, that CBDC, at least the latter 2 letters, stand for digital currency, and that this is the Indian government's first public experiment in digital currency. There are a number of big feelings to have about a digital currency that is operated by a nation state. You go read the Bitcoin white paper. It's to me, it hits you like a splash of cold water in hell, that the technology enables individuals to exchange value in an environment which lacks trust. And I'm no economic historian, but the notion of a state-provided currency, what the crypto kids would refer to as fiat currency, part of the value there for many people is they don't have to trust each other. I don't have to trust you if you give me US dollars. I just have to trust the United States government. Part of the dream of Bitcoin, and not strictly Bitcoin, but cryptocurrency, is the trust is baked in to the computer science. It's baked in to the code. Therefore, you and I can transact despite not trusting one another without a third-party entity that we both mutually trust. I think that's a thing that needs to exist in the world. I think that's a tool which humanity deserves. I think it gets us a step closer to recognizing that just because you were born in that part of the planet and I was born in this part of the planet does not mean that we cannot find common ground. And what more sort of plain and simple example of common ground is there, particularly between two people who have no trust established, than I have this glass of lemonade. I will sell it to you for X amount of money. And you say the refreshing and delightful qualities of an ice cold glass of lemonade are worth that amount to me. Therefore, we transact. There's a lot more to come, I'm sure, on India's uh, experiment and state operated digital currencies. So there's not a whole lot else worth saying right now, I don't think. Justin Ling, Wired. Doreen Bogdan Martin's election to the UN's ITU, beating the Russian candidate, signals support for a US-backed open internet, but significant issues remain. I haven't followed this story. I'm not going to dive into it now. Stacey Elliott, Decrypt, CoinGecko, normalized exchange volume for crypto.com has dropped 91% over the past year, 90% for Huobi, 77% for FTX, 75% for Coinbase, and 57% for Binance. Blockchains over crypto, episode 27 Roman numerals. Trading in bits of data which have some relationship to what human beings use to purchase food and shelter it's a thing that only needs to exist as much as there is sort of meaningful utility in the thing that you're migrating out to US dollars. It's sort of a clumsy statement. I apologize. Uh, if all the transactions that one conducts in the course of their daily life are ultimately conducted in fiat currency, you wake up, you go to the subway station, you pay to ride the train, you get off the train, you step into a cafe, you pay for, a cup of coffee and a scone, and later on you buy your friend's dinner, and somewhere in the middle there, your account is debited for your streaming video service and number of other things. And you buy a sweater as a gift for a loved one on your way home. Like, you have that sort of stereotypical day in Commerceville. Today, 4 out of 5 of those transactions happen in fiat currency. So it's not particularly surprising that the trading volume in marketplaces which exist primarily for, or at least not maybe primarily, marketplaces in which much of the trading volume is from cryptocurrency A to cryptocurrency B to cryptocurrency C to cryptocurrency Z, that there's not a whole lot of reason to do that if what you ultimately do with that value requires that it gets exported back out to fiat. So in a world where you can pay for your ride on the train and your lunch and a gift for a loved one and your streaming video service in a cryptocurrency, then I would imagine the trading volume in marketplaces like what Coinbase and Binance offer will at least stabilize. The issue there is you need enough stability in those currencies in order for it to be worth using them to buy things which are primarily bought and sold using, relatively speaking, significantly more stable currencies, which is to say, fiat currency. Again, out of my depth, and generally speaking, my point of view on cryptocurrency is hold some Bitcoin. It's the original, it's the most scarce, it's the thing that will most likely stand the test of time. Maybe hold some ETH because you want to play in that space, but beyond that, trading back and forth doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of value there. Last set. Kari Johnson, Wired. An interview with Gerard de Graaf, the director of a new EU office in San Francisco, on the DMA coming into force on November 1st and its impact on tech companies. I don't know what DMA stands for. I'm sure I'll find out because, you know, the weightiest part of this this headline is that the European Union has set up an office in the city of San Francisco. That's a big deal. And my assumption is that the DMA is a piece of regulation aimed at technology companies. And so it's going to be in the news a lot. So we'll get to it then. But for right now, that's all I have to say.